My name is Zelon Crawford, and I'm the Senior Associate Dean of Student Affairs here at the School of Professional Studies. I'm also a proud alumna. I won't let you know what year. Special thank you to the CSPA team for once again putting on a best-in-class conference. I have the privilege of introducing our very timely session this morning, Leadership Lessons in Leadership. In a hectic news cycle, how can student journalists best manage balanced coverage and lead their staffs while covering sensitive and sometimes divisive topics? Our moderator this morning really needs no introduction. Shirley Carswell, Executive Director of the Dow Jones News Fund. She is a graduate of Howard University, go Bison. Carswell has also taught at Howard University's Cathy Hughes School of Communications after 25 years at the Washington Post, where she was Deputy Managing Director. I also want to acknowledge Shirley for her unwavering support of CSPA over the years. Time is our most precious commodity, and she continues to donate countless hours of her time to events like these, and for that we are truly grateful. Esha Karam is a senior at Columbia College and an editor and reporter at the Columbia Daily Spectator. At the Spectator, she served as the University News Editor in 2023 and as the Managing Editor in 2024. Esha is originally from Nashville, Tennessee. Next up is Pratika Katiyar, is an award-winning activist and writer. She has been quoted and published in multiple media outlets, including Teen Vogue, CNN, TechCrunch, and more. A fierce advocate, she spearheaded a global press freedom campaign, engaging thousands of journalists, and became the youngest member of the Student Press Law Center's Board of Directors. Her widely read research covers a range of topics, from free speech on social media to AI policy, and for her work, she has been invited to speak at the United Nations, among other notable places. Pratika is recognized as one of Glamour magazine's College Women of the Year, and is on the Her Campus and Elf Cosmetics 22 Under 22 list of most inspiring women. Anna Koontz. Nope, that's not Anna Koontz. Holden Lee is an editor-in-chief of the Campanile, Palo Alto High School's award-winning newspaper. As a journalist, Holden is passionate about reporting on national issues relevant to his local community, including coverage on topics such as Boeing's quality control issues, the Israel-Hamas conflict, and the Dominion v. Fox News defamation lawsuits' impact on the integrity of voting systems. He is also an editor-in-chief of Agora magazine, the first high school foreign affairs magazine in the United States. Now, last but certainly not least, Anna Koontz is a senior at Bronx High School of Science here in New York City. She currently serves as an editor-in-chief for her school newspaper, The Sciences Survey, with over 500,000 annual online readers. Anna also enjoys conducting interviews and writing profiles for school's alumni magazine. She is passionate about honoring and sharing life stories from fellow classmates to Nobel and Pulitzer Prize winners. Thank you all so much and looking forward to hearing your discussion.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for that great introduction. What we are here today to talk about is leadership. And what I hope that you'll take from this panel, brief though it is some tips that you can apply in your own newsrooms, in your own schools, to help you get through the tough times. So I'd like to start with Esha. Esha, just, 3 months after she was named managing editor, faced this huge story, the campus uprisings, the campus protests. She started in December. This protests really sort of blew up in April, and she had to figure it out. So Esha, could you just tell us briefly what you did, when you saw this big story coming at you, aside from the obvious, which was send people to cover it?
Yeah, so actually the night that the encampment started here on campus, myself and a group of some of our editors were on a bus to DC, where we were covering our president testifying in front of Congress. So we were on the bus. It was 3, 4 a.m. in the morning when we get a text from our reporter who said, there's something going on campus. People are pitching tents. And so we stayed up all night on the bus to break the story. And, all through the day while we were in DC, we were juggling, covering this live congressional hearing while also, making sure our reporters on the ground at Columbia's campus were sort of following the developments that were happening. And when we returned from DC that night, we're still covering 24/7 what was going on, and the next day is when the NYPD made their first round of arrests on campus. And so I think, as a leader, it was certainly challenging, both in terms of as you were saying, sort of getting people to cover, getting people on the ground, but also, managing the sort of safety aspect, making sure that our reporters, weren't getting sort of caught up in with the NYPD as well. And I think at the same time, we were, committed to, covering everything with the accuracy, the urgency, and the speed, as some of the only reporters who were allowed on campus at the time. And also, we had this sort of really deep connection with our community. And so, as students, we are sort of part of this community. We care very deeply about it. And we also had connections to, protesters and organizers. And so, in a lot of ways, this was just sort of us using our sourcing network and using the people that we had been talking to sort of understand what was going on. So yeah, there was definitely a lot of moving parts, and it was an evolving situation. And I think as time went on, we were doing this sort of 24/7 coverage for weeks and weeks. And especially as, Columbia became the center of national attention, there were sort of new factors, right? There was, misinformation spreading. Even some of the major national news outlets on campus were getting a lot of things wrong. And so that added a sort of another layer of, things that we were trying to, combat and sort of cover in that way.
Great. So when you have a story like this that's really polarizing, it's tough even for seasoned pros to handle it and to make sure all of the, that there's balance, that there's, authenticity, that there's accuracy. This is even more challenging for, student journalists who may not have had the support of their administration or may not have, the resources or even the support of the entire student body. I'm going to skip over to Holden now, because Holden, as the EIC at Palo Alto High School, can you tell us how you managed peer pressure in this kind of instance?
Yeah, so in my case, this kind of important moment that I was talking about was when I was covering, it was right at the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas conflict in October of 2023. And similarly, we were covering another story initially, but pretty much immediately had to switch right when the conflict happened. And the next week was our production cycle, so we knew we had about 8 days to get a whole story written and designed, put on a double truck. And so, yeah, I mean, there was time pressure, and we felt like we wanted to do the best that we could, give good, accurate representation to both sides, but also, providing the news in a timely manner. So the way we initially approached it, right, so at that time, I was just a reporter on staff. I was working with a team of other reporters, and we met with our editors. And at first, again, we really wanted to focus, center the focus of the story on how is this conflict impacting our community, and taking it from the lens of how are people being impacted, instead of trying to go into the nitty-gritties of the conflict, because ultimately that would lead to probably more harm and more divisiveness than we would have originally have intended. And so for those 10 days, pretty much, every lunch period, every day after school, I was going out reporting, interviewing people throughout my school, throughout my community, professors. We live really close to Stanford, so I was able to interview Stanford professors in history and Middle Eastern conflicts. It was a whole process, and it was very intense, but ultimately, once we published, we did actually receive a bit of feedback and criticism online and in person, both saying that we could have gone more of one side of the story, could have gone more, Israeli or Palestinian sources. And yeah, I mean, I think in any controversial story, you're gonna have people who are gonna be like, you could have done a better job. Because again, this is a very sensitive topic. People were really emotional and really impassioned about this. And again, this was right at the beginning of the conflict. So emotions were really raw, really real. And so you kind of have to learn as a journalist, yeah, people are going to be criticizing the work that I spent a lot of hours putting into, but at the same time, I have to be okay with that happening because I'm putting out a piece of, I'm putting out a story that is important to spark, community discussions around and seeing how people within our communities, our neighbors are directly being affected by a war that's happening, thousands of miles away. And for that, that's what's most important here. And it's okay if we get a little bit of criticism, which is to be expected on really anything of this magnitude.
And can you talk a little bit about on the staff? There was some tension there as well, right?
Definitely. So one of the editors that I was mentioning, so she was Jewish American, and she definitely had strong opinions from the onset about the conflict. And so I think for us, it was honestly hard at some times to really have discussions about even just the focus of the topic, because again, she was very one-sided. And I think that is to be expected. What you can do though to mitigate that is to work with other people around. And I think at a baseline level, she understood the importance of having objective journalism and having unbiased reporting. And so that's why she would, sometimes excuse herself from some of these discussions if she felt like she couldn't, participate as effectively as she otherwise would. And so I think, yeah, what's most important here is that you're communicating with each other and that you have a baseline, common understanding of what exactly the values of journalism are. You want to have unbiased sources. And honestly, I think at some points it was good to have a perspective because she would check back against sometimes our other, perspectives. And so it's good to have that balance here, but at a baseline level, again, you got to have that understanding that we're fact first, we're fact focused. And that's the most important thing that you got to keep throughout the story.
Thank you. Now, Anna, I want to bring you in to talk about the pressure from above. Now, the Bronx School for Science, you're in New York, of course, so tell us about how your administrators and your bosses, so to speak, reacted to some of the coverage that you guys had.
Yeah, definitely. So I live in New York, and New York is one of 32 states, I believe, that does not fully legally protect freedom of the press for student journalists. And so this means that my school newspaper is censored, and every article that we publish must first be read by my journalism advisor, and the school administration does not allow us to publish anything that can be controversial or might reflect badly upon the school. So one time last year, I noticed that waste management was a really big problem at my school. And I noticed that many of the students were just ignoring the distinctions between the different bins in the cafeteria, and and because of this, the custodians were just throwing out all the compost and recycling as if everything was trash. And so this was really important to me. I wanted to raise awareness about this problem and encourage people to change these habits so that we could all collectively be more responsible and environmentally sustainable. So I pitched the article, and my journalism advisor was hesitant to allow me to write it because, again, it would make the school look bad. So I understood where he was coming from, and I do think it's valid for a school to want to maintain its reputation, but at the same time, it really frustrated me because I think journalists should be able to freely criticize and fully shed light on important problems in their community. That's kind of partly the point of journalism. So I was allowed to write the article, but I had to do it from a positive perspective or a positive angle. And it was difficult to balance this because I didn't want to sugarcoat
the problem, but at the same time, I had to adhere to these limitations. And yeah, this is honestly something that many student journalists across the country have to balance.
Now we're going to bring in Pratika, because Pratika's been working on this issue for several years as a member of the Student Press Law Center board. So Pratika, can you tell us like where things stand now with the laws trying to help student journalists?
Absolutely. So what Anna was chatting about was New Voices. So 32 states don't have New Voices protections. New Voices is essentially a movement to restore First Amendment protections for student journalists. In 1988, there was a Supreme Court ruling, Hazelwood v. Kohlmeyer, which essentially said that student newspapers could be censored or undergo prior review, administrative review. And so we're trying to reverse those effects of that Supreme Court ruling. So 18 states do have New Voices. Some are like California, Minnesota, West Virginia. But so many states like New York do not have those protections. And so at any point, student journalists at public and private, although New Voices protects public universities and high schools, they can be censored at any time. They can undergo prior review. And so we're trying to get all of these laws passed in different states, but obviously there's a lot of pushback in certain states for various reasons. A lot of them can relate to, not wanting to give student journalists free rein on the issues that they're covering, not treating student journalism of importance, even though time and time again, student journalists have shown that they're able to handle controversial issues, and in fact, sometimes are the best equipped to handle those issues because they really have a pulse on what's going on their campuses. And a lot of the times it's with reputation of schools. So administrators will often censor because they don't want the school to look bad. And a lot of the time, student journalists in certain states don't even know about New Voices, or they don't know that this is wrong. They'll undergo prior review because they just think that that's the process. So we're really trying to build awareness around that because I think, there's still methods of fighting back, even if your state doesn't have a New Voices law. And so something that we always say at SPLC is, if you're writing a story and you're hesitant to publish, do it, write that story. SPLC will always have your back because, all these stories really matter and they're important in holding power to account. So yeah, that's kind of, we're working to reverse those effects, but they're still very much there.
Mm-hmm. So for students who may be in a state that doesn't have that protection, what would you suggest they do if they're considering a story that may be a little sensitive, or if they've already been told they can't publish it? Is there anything they can do at that point?
Absolutely. I think a lot of the times, advisors are always hesitant in the sense that they don't have protections for their jobs either. New Voices laws include protections for advisors. So if your advisor says no, or maybe, you're hesitant, you have self-censorship issues, like your school doesn't necessarily outright censor, but you're worried about maybe your advisor or yourself, I always recommend, one, looking at New Voices in your state. Sometimes in certain states, like California is notorious for this, schools will still censor even though there is a New Voices law. And so looking to see if you actually have a New Voices law, because that is just straight up illegal and should not be happening. Although I'm not a lawyer, so contact our lawyers. But if you're in a New Voices state, that shouldn't be happening. If you're not in a New Voices state, there's still a lot of things that you can do. One, a lot of times there's coalitions. We need your stories, we need your testimony to get these bills passed. So I always recommend looking up SPLC and looking at the New Voices movement, seeing if you can get involved. A lot of states have coalitions. New York has one. And we've been working year after year to get the law passed in New York. Seeing if you can, take your story and turn it into some type of testimony or some type of plea to try to get that bill passed. And then also, turning to SPLC in the sense that if you have a story you really, really want to publish, you really think matters, but you're told that you outright cannot publish it, I'm sure that SPLC can find a way to work with you on that, because oftentimes it's the stories that are, gonna expose some sort of power imbalance or hold authorities in your school to account that are often told that they can't be published, and so we can work with you on that.
Great, thank you. Now I'm going to focus a little bit more on leadership and some of the specific qualities of leadership, of leaders. Esha, tell us what advice you would give to someone who is new as a leader in their school. How would you, what's a good tip for a new leader?
Yeah, I think it can be really hard, especially as like students leading other students. It can feel like, oh, these people are older than me, or they're the same age as me. Like, why should I be their leader? But I think there's a lot of room for different types of leaders and different types of personalities to be leaders, and that's something that I learned really early on. I think, I wasn't always like the loudest voice in the room. I wasn't super extroverted. But I found, as I grew into my role, that there was still a really important space for that. And that, even if I wasn't the loudest person, I could still, reach out to individuals and sort of, lead a team that was sort of focused on a specific task. And so I think, and I see this sort of all the time with younger leaders as well, as like, a hesitancy to apply for that spot or apply for that editor position, because, they don't feel like they can, lead a room or sort of, lead our meetings and things like that. But I think there's, more room for that than you think. And I think, I just would always encourage people to, apply and try out a leadership position, even if you don't have any experience doing that or stepping into that kind of role.
Anna, any advice?
Yeah, I think that, so with journalism, a lot of journalists value having hard facts or well-researched information and just really knowing what's going on. But I think that an important part of journalism that people often overlook is being able to embrace uncertainty. And I think that adaptability is a really important quality to have in a leader. I think particularly since there are so many different things that can happen. There can be, like as Holden and other people are talking about, there can be like sudden stories, like breaking news that you need to suddenly pivot and adjust to. And sometimes you'll need to like reassign editors to different stories, and you need to be like always on your toes and always ready to support your staff in any way that's needed.
Great. Holden?
I'll talk more about like the editor-staff dynamic. I think the most important thing that I've learned, especially being in EIC this past year, is being proactive and like checking in with people like throughout. I mean, we have a whole cycle, right? Story assignments, outlines, drafting. I'm sure all of you guys have the same thing. What's important though is that you're, reaching out to people and like checking in with people, because a lot of people are hesitant. I mean, when I was first joined the staff, I was kind of nervous. Like these are seniors, these are big kids on the staff, and so they might be nervous to go out and like reach out to you. And so that's what's really important, is that you go up to them and say, what can I help you with? Not, is there anything I can help you with? Because that's just a yes or no question. What can I help you with? And then they'll be a lot more, available, and they'll be like, hey, I don't really understand how InDesign works. And it's like, oh yeah, we can totally help you with that. So yeah, that's the most important thing. And then also, secondly, is having empathy for people. Like, again, journalism is inherently like time-based. People have to make certain deadlines, but at the same time, we're all students here. We have lives outside of journalism as well, and it's important to recognize that and have empathy for our classmates, especially, throughout the whole process. So I think those are the two most important things.
Thank you. Pratika.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about the advocacy side as well. I remember my first board meeting for the Student Press Law Center, and it was my first in-person board meeting in 2022. I had just finished my freshman year of college, and I was incredibly nervous. I was like the youngest person in the room. I was sitting like next to a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist on our board, a bunch of lawyers. Like, it was just a crazy time, and I remember just like getting a seat at that table, and I was super hesitant. I didn't know what I was really doing. And then we were talking about something, and then came a topic, and I had a lot to say. And at the end, after I spoke up, I realized, I had a lot to contribute. There was a reason that I was sitting at that table. And I say this a lot about a lot of places that I've been at. I feel like I've fought for a seat at every table that I've been at. And just knowing that, you deserve that seat. So, not letting that imposter syndrome kind of get to you. But also just knowing that, like, when it comes to advocacy and also, like, working in the policy side of journalism or, like, the law side of journalism, there's a lot of almost negativity in the world. There's so much going on that impacts the work that you do. So in terms of being a good leader, learning to compartmentalize and looking at the goal that's at hand, but also seeing, like, as Holden was saying, seeing how you can be an empathetic leader and person and advocate and taking the stories that you work on and turning them into actual change, and seeing how you can, get a policy enacted based on certain stories that you've heard and the people that it's impacted. So always being, human-centered, story-centered, I think will take you a long way in the advocacy world.
Great, thank you. Those were good tips. Now, Holden mentioned something I want to come back to. He said, we're all students. Where do you carve out the time to be a good leader? Anybody can take this one. How do you carve out that time? I mean, you've got school, you've got, I'm sure, other activities, you've got, deadlines. How do you make sure that you're not just, plowing ahead without thinking about leadership and how to lead a group of people?
Start. One thing, so for us, some publications I know just have like one EIC. For us, we have 5. So yeah, I know it's a lot. But yeah, we have a whole editorial, group. And so what's important for us is that, like, obviously we can't spend all of our lives, just devoted to journalism. As an EIC, like, I know when production weekend comes around and we're sending to the printers, like, yeah, I'm probably gonna book that, like, have that weekend pretty empty because I know I'm gonna have to spend a lot of time on that. But in general, I would say it's important, that you're just checking in with each other and you're communicating with each other. We have, for example, like weekly meetings at lunch with our advisor. And so that kind of helps us, set the tone for the week. We plan out what's happening. We highlight any challenges that are coming on and then try to target those as well throughout the week. And so again, it's just kind of working with other people who are other editors and kind of holding each other accountable and saying, like, hey, I have a math test coming up. Can you handle, story assignments this cycle or whatever? But it's having that balance and flexibility with each other that really helps.
Yeah, I think, communication is key. I think, a running joke, if you ask like generations of Spectator editors, they'll all sort of joke about how they never went to class. And that was definitely true of me during the encampment specifically. We were just working around the clock. There were multiple, all-nighters. And so sometimes you do have to make that sacrifice. But I do think, our culture at Spectator is really shifting. When I joined the paper, there were, fewer expectations and boundaries, I think. It was editors, staying up until 4 or 5 in the morning every night. And so since then, we've been able to set better boundaries. We have a strict cutoff at midnight every night that we're in production. And, it's just about sort of setting those boundaries. And I think it can be harder, especially as a younger reporter, when you're like sort of, you feel that pressure to say yes to everything, to say yes to every assignment, every breaking news story. But it's something that I've gotten better at as I've, grown in college. And, I've just gotten sort of better at setting boundaries around my time for school, my time for seeing my friends, and my time for Spectator.
Yeah, for me, I completely agree with what people said about the importance of communication and setting boundaries. I know different high schools organize their school newspaper in different ways, and some high schools have it as like an after school or a club. At my school, our newspaper is a class. It's a journalism class, so every day we have a full class period to work on it, and that's super helpful because it's this dedicated period of time where you're like, okay, this is the time where I'm going to work on writing or editing or whatever you need to be doing. And also, similar to what Holden was saying, we also have a few different editor-in-chiefs and then a bunch of managing editors and copy editors. So I think we do a pretty good job of dividing the work evenly and supporting each other.
I can add on really quickly. I'm always super candid about this, but my sophomore year of college, throughout college I worked a part-time job, going to class, and then my sophomore year, my mom was battling cancer, and so I was going through so much, and I was on the board for SPLC, and that's like usually like 10 hours at least of my time. I work on fundraising, some of our advocacy efforts. It was a lot, and looking at my Google Calendar, one of my best friends is like, I think you're girl bossing a little too close to the sun, and it was true, and I got really, really burnt out that semester. There was so much going on, and so I recently learned, and I don't know if I'm really getting the hang of it. I work at the ACLU right now, so I don't know if it's like really happening, but like taking the time off and saying no, and like having good mentors in your life who understand, who've been through things before you, and like talking to them, having a conversation, being really candid about what you're going through. Everyone is going through something, you just never know. And so, if you can't devote time to something, say no, get comfortable saying no. No one's gonna hate you if you say no. You're not a lesser person. Just learning to set those boundaries is super, super important. Otherwise, you will get burnt out. I was super burnt out in college, and so, yeah.
Great. Unfortunately, we're running low on time, so I want to leave some time for questions. Is there anybody in the audience who has a question they'd like to ask the panel? Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Justin. I work on Silver Chips, a paper in Maryland. My question is, if you're working on mentoring younger editors and younger leaders for your paper, what do you think some of the best ways are to do that, to sort of get people used to it, to bring them up and make them prepared?
Anybody want to take that one, mentoring?
At Spectator, we definitely have a really big culture of mentorship. I asked some of my predecessors like what their favorite memories are, and they always say, mentoring people and sort of seeing them grow from a young reporter to an editor. And I think, I guess my advice would sort of be to sort of find the qualities that, and sort of nurture those qualities as opposed to like specific talents. I think the biggest thing is having that like passion, that curiosity, as opposed to, being a good editor or being really good at InDesign. I think the most important thing is to just sort of nurture that like passion and that curiosity.
Anybody else?
I guess I'll add on. So at least at my school, so we have like 8 production cycles a year, so 4 a semester. And so for this like second semester, we choose like the next year's editorial staff like right around now. And then we kind of do a transition cycle where the incoming group basically shadows us. So they basically just, see what we're doing and they help out with kind of our tasks. And then finally for the last cycle of the year, they take over. We're still there, we're just like reporters, but then they actually take over. And I think that really helps because you don't really I feel like there's a lot to kind of learn that is just like hands-on. Like you have to experience what it's like to be an editor to actually know what it is. And so when you're, when you have that, it gives that time for like that transition cycle where you still have the old people there. That kind of helps because, you can like rely on them if there's anything that comes up last minute or whatever. I think also, having training sessions for us, again, so we have 5 editors, so we have 5 incoming people as well. So we do like a mentorship system, so like one current editor pairs with another one. And throughout the whole, like selection process, we kind of recognize what are the areas that they need to improve on, what are the areas that they're already strong in. And so we look at what they need to improve on. During this cycle right now, I try to target what those things are, and like have honest conversations with them, yeah, you got it, let's simulate some situations where someone's having like real struggle, like what are you guys doing here, or like just even going through stories and like editing them or doing designs together. Like I think all of those things just really help, but you also got to spend a bit more time during this transition cycle and like actually invest in mentoring because it does pay off after all.
See you and then we'll go back to you.
I'm the editor-in-chief of my school's publication, and we're kind of in that cycle, like you said. So we have a lot of, my friends, I'm a junior this year, so a lot of them are now stepping into editor positions, and it's kind of difficult because we're kind of butting heads. So a lot of my friends on staff are actually my best friends, and so it's really hard to manage those friendships while also trying to be a leader. Like right now I'm going through a situation where I have some of my friends who just they can't agree on a story angle, and there's this one girl who really wants to write the story, but then I have my other friend is the person who should write the story. She's the most experienced with it and can do it better. And so it's kind of, how do you manage those friendships and be a good leader and like, but also keep those friendships, like how do you find that balance?
Who'd like to take that one?
Start. I definitely experienced that a lot. I think some of my best friends in college are on the paper, so I totally relate. And I think we definitely became closer even like as we started covering things together. And I think the biggest thing for us is having time where we're working together and having time where we're not working together. And I think we've gotten really good at like sort of acting a certain way around when we're in our sort of professional mode. We're very like respectful opinions, but we definitely butt heads a lot. And then, you know, we sort of are completely different when we're not in our spectator environment. And so it's kind of like this switching of mindsets almost, where you have to sort of acknowledge that like, yes, you're friends, but like you're in a professional setting almost. And it can feel weird because you're also like just in a student club. But we really do treat it as like a sort of professional work environment, and I think that really helps for us.
And I'd just like to say that happens in the professional world too. When you become friends with people, but you have to manage them, and yeah, the switching back and forth can be tricky.
I think also, I mean, we have the exact same problem with like, so we're in charge of writing like editorials, right? And so of course an editorial is supposed to represent the interests of the staff, but I mean, we have only limited time to do full discussions, right? And sometimes there's parts of the article that like we're still a little bit unsure of, right? And so I think during those times, like, I mean, just 2 weeks ago, we were writing an editorial and we spent like, we have like long periods, like an hour and a half, and we spent literally the whole period, just the editors kind of like arguing about like, how are we gonna like structure this story, you know, because there's like facts missing. And I think what's important is that you give the time and space to have those arguments. Like, it's important not to just like sideline those in the face of, in trying to like just be as efficient as possible. But also, you know, when things take a while, you know, after you hear out people's different points of view, ultimately you have to go back to, you know, what are we trying to do here? As an editorial, we're representing the interests of the staff. And, you know, sometimes if we have these really long discussions, we're inserting too much of our own personal opinion, right? And so it's okay if, you know, sometimes we might have to sacrifice a little bit of our own personal things. And I think you can mentor that by, you know, being okay and like relinquishing in certain areas and showing that it's okay to do so with your friends as well, and they can do so as well. And your friends, so I'm sure they would, so, yeah.
All right, anybody else want to contribute to that?
Yes, I can add a little bit. I think that I feel like too often student newspapers have a bit of a competitive environment where people are more focused on like maybe making their article be the top news or like trying to write the best story and not focusing on supporting each other and collaborating with each other. I think it's really important to take time to celebrate each other. Like maybe your best friend got like the A1 news, but you didn't. Then you can celebrate with them and read the article and be like, wow, I really enjoy this article. And then maybe next time you are the one who gets to do that. And so you can kind of take turns at that, but it's important to acknowledge that it doesn't need to be you every time, or it doesn't need to, or like you can share the responsibility.
Sometimes you need to say, you know, you're my friend, but I'm the editor, you know. We have one question in the back. Can you stand up, please?
Sorry, I'm Allison, and I just wanted to ask a question about, similar to the mentorship, that my friends and I are going to be editors next school semester, and we were just kind of in the burden of how we would start writing with like a blank sheet again. And so we were just wondering how we could show or teach the new how to ask the right questions with what standards, and from the interviews or from the responses, know the necessary things to add or not add. That would be great.
So it sounds like you're looking for advice on how to sort of get started in this new team, and you're starting sort of from scratch, or yeah, okay.
Talk about that. One thing that my school newspaper staff does, which I think is really important, is every year at the beginning of the year and also just throughout the year, we will take times to read different journalistic articles like from the New York Times or from the New Yorker, and then just have a class discussion about it, about what's good about the article, like how do they do the lead, what type of quotes do they choose, how do they structure it. And I think having these discussions and really like reading an article and annotating it, not for the information it's giving, but for how the author wrote it, I think that's really important, because the best way to become a better writer is by reading. And as you read, you'll get more ideas and you'll get more inspiration and you'll understand how professional journalists write really good pieces of writing, and then you can incorporate that for yourself.
That's a great tip.
I'll just add, we do like the same thing, right? So right at the beginning of the new year, we have a bunch of new staff writers, right? And they probably don't have much journalism experience, if at all. And so we call it our boot camp. And so I think one thing that we've done in the past, which I don't recommend, is we used to have just a bunch of like slides presentations about like, you know, these are the different sections, this is how to interview, you know. But that's not very helpful, because like it's a lot of information just kind of coming at you. And again, for me, I really think that journalism is like a really hands-on activity. So that's why this past semester, actually what we started doing was pairing a writer, like a more experienced writer, with a new staff member. And then they would go out and write either like a breaking news story or cover like a sports game even. Again, something like not too difficult, but something that's just like, you know, a shorter story. And I think like pairing them up like early on so that they have someone to like rely on as a mentor, and then together they go in and they gather the quotes, together they go and write an interview, and then finally they, you know, like publish, and even doing the design part, like having that buddy system, super, super helpful. And also again, just that hands-on experience of where the person's kind of going into the field and actually experiencing that. Yeah, definitely would recommend that more than slides.
Just add on a little bit. I think even at the college level, we definitely take on people who have no prior experience in journalism. So just seconding everything that you said, we do the exact same thing where we pair people up. We also try to make our trainings as interactive as they can be. So, you know, experiential learning and sort of giving people activities, which can be more helpful, again, than like slides presentations.
My name's Maddie, and I'm with the Midnight, and I know a few of you mentioned controversy, and as somebody who's been on the receiving end of that, especially from like higher ups, it can kind of almost feel like you're being bullied. So how can leaders console those people that might be, you know, receiving that controversy while also maintaining a professional response from the paper itself?
Yeah, I can start with this one. I think at Spectator, since October 7th, we've received a lot of, you know, controversial comments, including, but not limited to, like death threats to some of our reporters, which as students was really hard to go through. It was hard as a leader to have to guide a reporter who was receiving all these hateful messages to her personal email, to her phone number even. And I don't know, there's no right answer. I think you have to just sort of be as empathetic as you can be. Our priority is always like the safety of our reporters. And so we, for the specific instance, we're just sort of supportive of our reporter and sort of let her know that we were sort of behind her reporting. But I think it can feel like, I mean, I've even gotten like personal messages about some of our reporting. And I think you kind of at some point have to, I don't know, separate yourself from that criticism and find a way to sort of either not look at social media or, you know, separate yourself from hearing all the criticism.
Yeah, to add on, like, I think when it comes to controversy, there's no easy way to deal with it. If you feel like you're being, you know, bullied by your administration, one, I don't think that should be happening. And, you know, two, know that you have options to protect yourself as a newsroom. In terms of like in a professional way, you know, you can reach out to different organizations. I know SPLC has a free legal hotline, so if it gets to that point, which I really hope it does not, and you feel like you need a legal protection, or you just want to talk to a lawyer confidentially without your administration knowing, without your advisor knowing, you can reach out to SPLC, say hey, this is what's going on. We're on the receiving end of this controversy, and it's feeling like there's a lot of push and pull, there's a lot of tension. But to Esha's point, I have written a lot of op-eds on issues like free speech, and I wrote a piece and I got a bunch of death threats on social media for it, and that's a big issue that a lot of people, a lot of young reporters deal with, is online harassment. And so, I just want to say, one, I think having a newsroom policy when it comes to mental health can be really, really important, and a newsroom, social media policy, teaching your reporters about digital security tools, or just security tools in general, even at the high school level, very important these days. So knowing how to protect your privacy online, how to make sure your email is just not out and about in random places. I think that's an important training to consider doing with your staff as a leader, acknowledging that this could be a problem in the future, even if it's not currently a problem. It's always best to be really, really prepared. And making sure your staff is aware of the resources they have, whether it's First Amendment resources, social media resources, anything to help deal with any potential controversy. It's always just be prepared.
Thank you. So sorry we're out of time, because I'm sure you guys have more questions. But can we please thank our panelists?